You are at the Power of Yes webinar. 3 things to do today to open kennel doors and send animals home. This webinar is a partnership between California for All Animals, Koret Shelter Medicine Program, being presented here by Maddie's Fund through the Maddie's University and Maddie's Million Pet Challenge platform. We're all here today. Maddie's Million Pet Challenge, of course, and the Learniverse. We want to thank Maddie so much for always opening the doors and their platform for us so that we can host these webinars, meet with you, and share ideas. Thank you, Maddie's Fun. Your presenter is California State Director Allison Cardona. Allison joined the Koret Shelter Medicine Program in January to lead the California for All Animals initiative. And I am so honored to introduce her today because I can tell you she is one of the most thoughtful and the most intentional teammates I've ever had the pleasure of working alongside. Allison is not interested in band-aids or entertaining conversations that are cooking up short-term solves. She's focused on root solutions, systemic solutions, fairness, and the harm that's being done or the harm that we could prevent from being done to animals and especially to each other. This woman cares on a cellular level about you and what it's like to work where you work and what it's like to be a member of your community that engages with your workplace. But in the name of getting to know each other a little better, I asked Allison for 3 different questions today because there's a lot to her that you're not going to get from a few polished paragraphs. So I want to encourage you to take any invitation she gives you to reach out and join her office hours when she posts them. She has our team reading new books, thinking new thoughts, stretching and growing, and believe me, you want in. So in the name of getting to know her more deeply, I asked her, what is one webinar or talk you think everybody in animal welfare should go to? And she shared Dr. Jyoti Robertson's free online meditation gathering. Try it for even 30 minutes, 30 seconds if you think you can't sit still. Where do you believe the biggest opportunity for progress lives in animal welfare? And Allison shared, and letting go of the illusion that we have control over animals once they're no longer in our care. And one thing you wish we'd start doing today, and she said, deep listening. Check out this video that features Mary Lou Shanrazmi on deep listening. So 3 things to know today, 3 places we hope to see you soon. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Allison.
Mandy, thank you so much. I'm so moved and touched, and I'm so grateful to be on this team. And thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Power of Yes. And I think just even listening to that introduction, it makes me think about what I can say yes to. And sometimes yes is leaning into discomfort or leaning into challenges. And so I'm so grateful to be here today with all of you and to talk about removing barriers to adoption at animal shelters. So I wanted to tell you first a little bit about my own journey with getting pets and where I started. I am Colombian American. My parents are immigrants from Colombia and came here in the 60s. I was born in the US and we got our first pet. My family always loved animals. We were living in Houston, Texas, and some neighbors, their cat had a litter of kittens. And my family, I had an older brother, and my parents took us, I was 3 years old at the time, to pick out a kitten from our friend's litter. I picked out Kissy. I think my mom named her. I picked out Kissy, took her home, and had her for 17 years and loved that cat so much. Kissy was an indoor-outdoor cat. She had a litter of kittens, I think at a year of age. We gave most of them away to friends, and we kept one, Rusty. And Rusty was my cat. He unfortunately ran away. I don't think we ever neutered. I don't think we even knew about it. So anyway, Rusty ran away, which was my first heartbreak, I think at age 5. We ended up getting Kissy spayed, I think because somebody at my dad's work shared that that was a good idea to do. So we had Kissy. The next pet I acquired was when I was 16 and we were living in Connecticut at the time, and we were at a mall, and there was a pet store in the mall, and I walked by and saw the cutest little fluff of, I think she was an American Samoyed or something like that, a smaller version. And I said, I want that dog. And I think I paid $400 for her and took her home. And we kept Lucy, who I named, for 12 years. The next cat I got after that was one that I happened to find when I was walking to the subway when I was living in New York City. And that was Astor. It was near Astor Place. He was 4 months old. I took him home and actually learned about stray cats in a parking lot nearby and started doing trap, neuter, return. So all of this to say is that none of those experiences involved a shelter. And I actually knew nothing really about shelters until I started volunteering and then working at the ASPCA almost 20 years ago. So I just wonder, all those opportunities there, but I can tell you this, I loved my animals. My family loved our animals. But the shelter and rescue was just not anywhere in our consciousness. And I don't think my story is unique. We know that people love animals, and we have the information to tell us that most US households have pets. So this is according to the pet industry, American Pet Products Association. And this is based on sales of pet products, people going to veterinarians, things like that. So they estimate that 70% of US households have a pet. Now, we probably know that it's more than that, but this is what the stats say. The other piece that really stood out to me is how much we spend on our pets every year. $123 billion is spent in pet supplies and anything related to pets. That is so much money. I think I live in California, and I think, I was thinking, LA County's budget is like 37 billion. So it's just so big. So what this tells us is that people have pets and they spend a lot of money on them. So the next thing we have to think about is, where do people get their pets from? So this is from a study by the Access to Veterinary Care Coalition that came out in 2018. So I'm sure there's updated numbers, but this was asking US households where they get their pets from. And we're looking at cats and we're looking at dogs. So if we look at cats, the majority of folks, I would say it's about a third. A third get them as strays. Now, I don't know where you live, but where I live, there's lots of cats on the street. And there's definitely kittens being born in the community. So folks are getting them as strays. Only about 27% of cats and dogs, the general population, gets from shelter or foster-based organizations. So it's really only a third. And when we look at purchasing, cats, it's a really small amount. And with dogs, it's about 29%. And that can be from a breeder, it can be online, it could be from a pet store. And I think this is important information so this is HSUS's Pets for Life program. And they primarily work in communities of color, in marginalized communities, in low income areas where folks have not really had access to pets or veterinary care. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. They have had access to pets. They have not had access to shelters and foster-based groups. You can see here that only 3% of folks that Pets for Life have worked with have gotten their pets from shelters or rescues. Most, over half, are getting them from a family, friend, or neighbor. You'll see too that a small percentage are purchasing them. It's really mostly from family, friends, and neighbors. So we really have to look at that 3%. BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are not getting their pets from shelters. So what does that mean for animal shelters? I think anyone who currently works in an animal shelter knows what's going on. We have a ton of animals sitting in shelters. And this is not just a feeling, this is a national trend, and we have the data behind it. Shelter Animals Count just recently came out with their third quarter report, And I believe they have close over 700 reporting organizations. And basically what they're seeing is that there's a gap. There are more animals coming into shelters than are leaving. Animals are staying longer periods of time in shelters, and they're not getting the outcomes that they used to. So the adoptions, transfers out, all of these things have stagnated. So let's think about those different levels that we just talked about. First of all, people have pets, more than 70% of households. Second of all, they spend a ton of money on them. And third of all, the general population is not really getting them from us. And when we look at BIPOC communities, they're definitely not getting them from us. And we're seeing that the result of that in the data across the country. Now, I want to say, I know that there's not just one reason, and we know that there could be multiple reasons why adoptions aren't happening, but I think we really have to take an honest look at ourselves as an industry and really start to examine this a lot more. And I have to say, we've put the messaging out there. We really have. Adopt, don't shop, save them all. This is out there in the consciousness, and there's definitely been a lot of advertising and a push for this, which is great. However, the numbers are not adding up. So what else can we do to really take an honest, hard look and move forward? So I'm suggesting today that we look at 3 different areas and then 3 ways to remove those. So these are 3 areas that I've identified as barriers. 1, we're going to talk about cost, and we're talking about adoption fees. 2, the application process and what it's like to actually adopt or try to adopt from a shelter or foster-based group. And then 3, communications, and really looking at how we communicate with our different communities. All right, let's look at cost barrier first. So ask yourself right now, what is your current adoption fee? Now, it could range anywhere from $20 to $500. And we just have to look honestly about what that might mean for folks who are trying to acquire a new pet. It might be a barrier today. So let's say $400 to adopt an animal. I don't have that on me, but I'm going to make sure that I keep that pet and I take care of that pet. So we have to think of that as a barrier. And we have to debunk the myth that adopters don't value free pets. When I go back to think about Kissy, the cat I got when I was 3 years old, we didn't pay any money up front for her. And I loved that cat until her last day. It had nothing to do with, and of course at that age, I wasn't aware of money, but it had nothing to do with how much we paid for her. And also there's been studies done around this. And at the end, I'll put in some resources for everyone to see, but definitely encourage you to check those out. There's definitely, sorry, I just saw a message to go back on screen. So there's definitely no correlation between value and how much you've paid. And think about anything that you've, I paid for my first car. Did I? No, I didn't. And I actually really valued that car. So, and obviously pets aren't cars, but just to say there's no correlation there. And we just have to think about that the cost of adoption can be a barrier for people and that people are getting pets. I did want to make one note. None of this is just like, let me do this one thing and that'll be it. Because we have to think about, it's really getting to know your community, and it's also trying different things. So I used to work for LA County Animal Care and Control, and we actually waived all our adoption fees, I think for a full year. There was no fee at all for cats. And we were seeing that things were kind of stagnating. And what we actually did instead was we decided to vary the cost. So it would be anywhere from $10 to $30 to adopt a cat. But we started doing really catchy promos. And it was something that was usually current with pop culture. I think there was one with Bernie Sanders sitting there his folded arms, and there were kittens all over him. And that went through the roof. So I think it's important that it's not just necessarily one thing. You really want to vary things up and really get to know your community and try different things out. But cost is definitely a barrier, and you have to think about bringing more people into your adoptions. Now, I know some of you, especially those who might work in municipal sheltering, I've heard this often say, we said this at LA County, adoption fees are revenue. And I understand too, when you're expected to bring in a certain amount of money and your municipality wants to see that. However, I'm here to tell you that it's not actually revenue. The cost of caring for an animal, it's really, it's so much higher than what you're actually going to get back in adoption fees. And this graph helped me to understand this. This is based on a program evaluation report of Austin Pets Alive that the Human Animal Connection Graduate School of Social Work at University of Denver did in 2018. And basically it shows they had a $160 adoption fee. And they started to show that based on the length of stay, you pretty much were not going to make any revenue past 2 days. Once you hit that mark, everything else is an operating loss. And so you're really spending more on the care of the animal than you are going to get back in an adoption fee. Now, obviously, we can talk about what it means for an animal to spend a long time in a shelter and how detrimental that can be. But when we're just looking at it from purely revenue, this is something that you could take or you could adapt to your own levels and bring to your elected officials to tell them why you should be waiving adoption fees or making it more accessible for everyone in your community. Okay, let's talk about a application process next. We talked about the cost component. So, all right, I'm just going to say this because a lot of times people say, we are doing conversation-based adoptions. We're very open. We're barrier-free. I hate to break it to you, but you might not be as barrier-free as you think. I did a lot of research and looked at a lot of websites and a lot of applications, adoption applications for this webinar. And I don't know that I would pass many of them, to be honest. I don't know that Allison at any point in my life would have passed many of them. And they were all pretty long. There were a couple, and I'll highlight some of those. But for the most part, they were pretty long. Multi-pages, essay questions. I feel like with an essay question, and I felt this way in school, there's always I'm like, there's a right answer here, and I'm trying to figure out what the right answer is. A requirement to speak to landlords, I'm just asking you, trust me, just take it off. Take it off. Housing we are in an affordable housing crisis across the country, and it's so hard. Most people are renters. Most people spend a lot of money on rent, and it's just really challenging. So people are adults. Let them figure it out on their own, but it can really be, I'll talk about bias in a few minutes too. It can be a really big barrier. So, and what are we really learning? If somebody wants a pet, they're going to get a pet. They might as well get them from us. This was something, just like asking intimate questions about people's lives, is just, I know for me, it feels creepy. And this was one that was surprising. Checking people's social media. I just think right there, I'm not sure what you're checking for or what that would bring, but I don't see how that could benefit in any way the adoption process, and really just invites in bias, prejudice, and misconceptions. Once again, got to go back to this. People are getting pets and they're not getting them from us for the most part. So what can we do to remove those barriers? So yes, interviewing, that's what I wanted to bring up, is that really there's a lot of prejudice and bias that can come in interviewing. And I think folks talk about moving away from interviewing. Yes, but even matchmaking can really bring in a lot of prejudice. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Yes. So these are actual policies and procedures that I found on folks' websites. I did not name names, but you may recognize yourself here. And here are three of them. So one says, staff will go through the application submitted and call back the ones that seem like the best match. Now, for me, right away, that brings up an example that's been used in hiring practices. And it's basically that there's been studies shown that when folks just look at resumes and you can have the same work experience, two people, the exact same work experience, but if one of them has an Anglo or white sounding name and the other one has a Black, African American, or ethnic sounding name, the one with the white sounding name will get called back, and the one that has the other name will not. It's been proven time and again. So we don't want to replicate that in our adoption field. So would definitely encourage folks to not do that and maybe even take names out of it. And why wouldn't you want to meet the person rather than just go by what's on paper? I know that I'm three-dimensional and am much more than just what's written down. Okay, next one. Agree to a possible future home inspection if the dog is a large breed or it's a dog that's been identified to need additional attention. I'm not sure what a home inspection would entail, and I don't even know that that's legal. I can tell you, I know my rights, and I'd be like, "Do you have a warrant?" It just sets up a dynamic where you're policing folks, and that can be very intimidating. And then the third one that I found, which I found to be so interesting, is that it was listed never had any animal control violations, cruelty convictions, or broken any adoption contracts in the past. Now, I have several questions here. One is, what does animal control violation mean? Does that mean a leash law? So if my dog was off leash, does that mean if my dog got loose and I was issued a citation? Does that mean if I was late on my license, I would no longer be eligible to adopt? Cruelty convictions, we just have to think about who is getting policed in our communities, and whether that's going to be any kind of prejudice against marginalized communities. And then the broken any adoption contracts in the past. This is ironic, right? Because we're asking people who adopt from us to return animals to us if they have a problem, but then we'll never adopt to them again. So these to me just all show up as pretty big barriers. Okay, next, the third barrier that we're looking at is communications. And this is really about being non-inclusive. Having events promoted only in English, such a barrier to folks who don't know about you and who may primarily speak other languages. The industry jargon piece, even saying TNR, even spay neuter, I think breaking things down into plain English and not assuming that people know what we're talking about. And this part, the assumptions about communities' attitudes towards animals, I think is so important. I've heard, working here now in California, so many folks at shelters say X community doesn't care for pets or X community doesn't appreciate pets, like making these sweeping generalizations about an entire community. And I think conversely saying all members of this community keep their animals outside. I can speak to my own identity as a Latina. We're not a monolith, right? There are Latinx folks who do many different things and treat their animals in many different ways. But I think it's really important not to make assumptions about a community or sweeping generalizations and really try to appeal to everyone. And finally, the adoption process being vague or unclear, really getting it out up front on your website, in your communications, and letting folks know that it's going to be an easy process. And hopefully you've simplified your adoption. But these are huge barriers in communications and engaging with your community. Okay. So in the chat, if you could tell me now which of the barriers that we just talked about, simplifying adoptions, um, the application process, and the communications, which of these do you honestly think have the potential to be lowered at your shelter or your organization? And feel free to pop it in the chat.
Allison, you want chat or poll? Or is this one chat?
This one's chat.
Okay, thank you.
Love that. Lowering the fees, need to add other languages, non-inclusive language. I love this. The first step is, self-awareness, right? And understanding where we're operating from. That's great. The availability of Hispanic language, communications, making sure to translate, applications. Yes, we certainly could do more with our multilingual communications, languages for sure. Great. These are excellent. Love that. Okay, cool. I feel like you're queuing me up for the next portion of this. We're going to talk about fewer barriers. All right, 3 things. And you all have started hitting on it. Simplify adoption, partner with your community. And I very intentionally did not say community outreach here. I think that that is applying something to folks, where partnering with your community is really about listening, getting to know, and finding the assets that already exist within a community. So I really encourage saying partnering with your communities. And then mitigating bias. And intentionally didn't say here removing bias, because we have to have the recognition that everyone has bias, unconscious and conscious. And it's about becoming aware of it and really being able to work through it. Okay, let's dive in. Simplifying adoption. Okay. First and foremost, with a fresh eye, even if you've done it recently, take a look at your policies and practices. And I really challenge you to ask yourself, are we just doing this because it's the way we've always done it? Think about the intention behind it. Think about the intended outcome, and then think about who it could be helping and who it could be harming. We did this practice at LA County, and it was really illuminating. So I really encourage you to look at your policies and practices and ask these questions. Reduce the length of application. Really, just cut it down. I'm going to show you an example of this. It really does not need to be that long. If we're really doing conversation-based adoptions, we're going to talk to people anyway, so just slash it. Remove housing-related questions. This is really key and important, and I'm going to talk a little bit about pet inclusive housing and the history of housing discrimination and housing policies. We don't need them. Take them out of there. Instead, you can just ask people if they need resources. And what I'm going to suggest is that you become really familiar with the housing policies in your community so that you can speak to people about what challenges they might face. Okay, simplify that vague or unclear language. Ask other people to read your process, to read your procedures. If they don't understand it, you've got to change it. And keep providing resources. Offer options. I just adopted a dog a couple of months ago, and I was like, yeah, just give me the dog. It was hard to absorb all of that during the adoption process, but I did read everything when I got home later and offer it in multiple languages and make it simple. So hopefully that was clear. That's number 1, simplify. And really, I challenge you. You may think it's simple, take another look. There's always more that you can simplify. Okay, next, partnering with the community. I cannot say this enough. We, in the animal welfare field, have excluded BIPOC communities. It's the fact. It's a reality that we all need to deal with and accept. And we can't move forward unless we start partnering with our communities and acknowledge this. And I think the data that I showed at the beginning really shows that. People have pets. They spend a lot of money on them, and they're really not getting them, for the most part, from shelters or foster-based groups. So how can we get to know our community? Well, You can also hire folks from your communities so that there's representation within your organizations. But just get to know really the deep listening practice. I hope everybody will watch that. It's really humbling and it's really eye-opening. Like, what am I actually looking for in terms of connection, and what am I hearing there? I talked about learning about historical housing policies in your area so that you can really understand where there is pet inclusive housing, where there isn't, so that you can know. I would really encourage everyone to check out heartla.org, which is an organization that helps with housing rights. It's so important to know your rights and about evictions. And that could be a really simple thing like asking someone who's bringing an animal, oh, I'm getting evicted. Have you been served anything in writing? That's huge. That was so eye-opening to me. And you can understand pet inclusive housing in your area. Learn what languages are prominent in your area. I live in Los Angeles. There are so many languages here, but the county and the city have outlined already, I think, the top 10 or 12. And they don't necessarily publish everything in those languages, but very important material they do, or they might just choose the top 2 or 3 to really just to begin to open up access to the community and get to know your community. And really make your applications, and some of you have already talked about it in the chat, available in other languages. And have to give a shout out to the folks at the Multicultural Marketing Group at Best Friends who have a website in Spanish, and they want you to use their materials. So feel free to go there and borrow and start to use materials, and make sure that you're getting to know the folks in your organizations too who speak other languages, and ask for their opinions and listen to them. So that's 2, partnering with your community. So the third one is mitigating bias. And once again, we said mitigating because this is a process. There's a lot of internal work that we all have to do. I know I've had to learn a lot about my own internalized bias, my own internalized racism, internalized homophobia, all of the things that I have. But where we really start to see it on an institutional level is in our policies and practices. So we want to become aware that bias exists and that it really is embedded into every aspect of this country and of the systems and policies that we have. So we want to create a welcoming and inclusive environment for all our potential adopters, and also for the folks who work and volunteer with us. So once again, listening to folks when they're giving you feedback is really important, and making sure that no matter who comes into your door, it's a welcoming environment and that you're not making any value judgments. And I'll share an example recently that someone shared with me of people assuming, this was a story about a donor, and it was people assuming that the white woman who walked in versus the Black woman who walked in was the boss, right? So the two women, one white, one Black, walked in, and the Black woman was actually the head of the organization, but the development person spoke to the white person, just assuming that they were the boss. So it's simple things like that that are microaggressions and can be really harmful and can really turn folks off from feeling welcomed in an environment. So checking those assumptions. Talk to your staff and volunteers. You know, there's lots of trainings that you can do out there. Put it in the resources. You can do Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity. The CARE organization has a great racial equity, diversity, and inclusion training that you can take. So get educated. And this is one that I really want to emphasize. Don't let matchmaking turn into screening. I talked about it a little bit. I think I got a little cut off with the interviewing now morphing into matchmaking. And we hear people a lot say, we're just looking for the perfect match. And so that bias can really creep in. And something that I really want to hit on is the idea of trusting your gut, or if I just have a feeling. That really can signify bias. It can be something that is actually triggering your unconscious bias that you don't even realize that you have. And if you're going with that feeling, you really could be excluding someone unintentionally. So I would really recommend, if you have a feeling about something, check in with it, with someone else about it and say, hey, I'm having this feeling. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Let's talk it out. So, and really thinking about, we were talking to somebody earlier in one of our boot camps, and it's like, really, anyone who's over 18 and walking in the door, can we help them find a pet? And really embracing that type of attitude, and making sure that your policies and practices reflect that. And like I said, integrating diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, not only into your adoption process, but also into your employee and staff process, so that you'll be getting true, genuine, safe feedback from your staff and volunteers. And this, once again, going to studies and a survey that was done earlier this year by Habri and sponsored by Petco Love. And this was actually to, I can't remember the number, I think several thousand folks, asking them about pet ownership, adoption, pet acquisition. And it was done with a whole group of folks, and across, there was white people, there was Black people, there was Asian, South Asian people, Latinx people, multiracial people. And overwhelmingly, the Black and Latinx respondents reported, and I believe for Black folks, it was 68% reported not feeling welcomed at animal shelters. And that's what we really have to pay attention to. We're seeing it on the other side as well, of the data that I showed earlier, right? 3% of folks in the BIPOC communities that were being worked with had gotten their pets from shelters and rescues. So we are not, as an industry, making shelters and rescue groups welcoming to BIPOC communities. And we just need to own that, and we really need to work to mitigate that. Okay, so I'm going to show you some lowered barriers in action. And I told you that there's some out there that I thought were great. And a big shout out to Maddie's Fund for doing the Open Arms Challenge last year. And this is one of the winners. This is Seymour Mutt's Rescue. And this is what they say on their website. We believe in lowering the barriers to adoption. And because of this, we do not require a minimum adoption fee. We do, however, rely on financial contributions, and any funds received is at the discretion of the adopter and goes towards the care of animals in our rescue, which is great. Basically, a pay what you can or donate what you can. And hopefully you can see here, it's a little small because it was on for a mobile device, but basically they ask your information, like your name. They ask, I think here, who lives in your household and what you're looking for, and then asks what kind of resources do you need. This is nice. Seymour Mutt's Rescue. Somebody said, clearly Simpson lovers. Yes. So nice, simple, easy to respond to. Here's another one. I love this. This is Montgomery County Animal Services and Adoption Center in Maryland. And they have things in multiple languages. They clearly have taken the time to get to know their community. They're offered in English. You can do it in Spanish, and you can also do it in Chinese. So they are appealing to folks within their community. And what I love for the Spanish one, it says, it's in Spanish. Habla español, completa el cuestionario de adopción en español. You click on that and you get everything in Spanish, and you're able to do it right there. It's very friendly, inviting, and inclusive. And yes, promotional materials. And this is LA County started doing all of their event promotions in English and Spanish. And just a note here, please don't use Google Translate unless it's like you need to, you're somewhere and you need to communicate something very quickly and it's an emergency. Other than that, it's just not, it's too literal and it's usually off the mark. Ask folks who are native speakers, ask folks who are fluent, and pay them if you're going to ask them to translate. If not, use professional translators, or you can go to a community college, hire folks, but just make sure that they're culturally relevant and ask folks who speak that language whether it makes sense. And I'll make one more quick note there too. even within the same language, it can be different in different regions. So my family is Colombian. In Colombia, we call a straw a pitillo. And I know that in Mexico, my Mexican friends tell me they call it popote. So it's the same idea, completely different words. So you just want to make sure that you're being relevant for the folks in your community. All right, it looks like we're ready for our poll question. Now, this is a poll question. So the question is, which of the following strategies would you like to explore implementing at your shelter? And here are the choices. Reduce the length of your adoption applications, produce communications in multiple languages, review existing material for unclear or complex language, engage in community partnership and listening, integrate diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into your practices, or reduce adoption fees. And we'll give it a minute to let folks answer. Okay, all right, so looking at that, and it looks like folks could also select multiple ones. So great, but it seems like there's the most energy around reviewing existing material for unclear or complex languages. And engage in community partnership and listening. I love that. I love that. And really
and to
encourage
produce communications in multiple languages too. That one was 66%. Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. And maybe once we go to Q&A, I would love to hear more about just like the reducing adoption fees. There seems to be less energy towards that. So I'd be really, and the length as well. Really curious to explore that a little more. But thank you for answering the questions. So here's what it comes down to. People love pets and they're going to get them. They get them. 70% of US households, $123 billion spent every year. A third of people from the general population get their animals from shelters. In BIPOC communities that are working with Pets for Life, it's only 3%. And shelters right now, I don't need to tell you, you have animals sitting there. I know we all want the same outcome. And actually someone this morning in our boot camp was talking about what the worst outcome could be. And seeing them sit in the shelter for months on end, she expressed that to her was not the right outcome. So I really want to encourage everybody, what can you do today to really take, first and foremost, an honest look at yourself, at your organization's practices, and what we want to accomplish. And to understand the power of saying yes. And also thinking about flipping things on its head. A good friend has talked about implementing that it's an automatic yes. And if somebody wants to say no, they have to get a supervisor's approval. And I really liked the idea of bringing other people into the conversation and understanding that we want pets to come from us so that they're spayed and neutered, so they're microchipped, so that there's a connection and so that we're actually seen as a resource to the community and not this intangible thing. And anyone who's ever been denied an adoption, and I have multiple times from rescue groups, and I think from an adoption organization as well, it's really kind of the worst feeling because I know how I feel about pets and I just want to be able to provide a home to one. So I would love to hear now from all of you, any questions that you have. It looks, I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and what you're thinking about after hearing about all of this. And
you have some great questions in here. So do you have any tips for how to persuade our municipal shelter to relate better to our Latino population? Southern Arizona is a richly bilingual community, but when I look at the shelter given names on the nightly adoption report, I don't see that well represented. What a great point. I know this is a two-part question. I'm going to stop there because I think right there, let's have a thought and then we'll read the second part.
Wow. Wow. First of all, amazing that you're thinking about this and that want to be more inclusive. I guess I would be curious that why is it the municipal shelter? Well, I guess the first step is that you're acknowledging this and that you want to be more inclusive. And I guess I would ask, what kind of partnership you've had with the community and who you've talked to. That would be my first step. And really finding out information from your community. Where are people getting pets? Where are pets coming from? That's another thing that you might look at, is where are your intake areas coming in? Because basically, if people have pets, they're acquiring them from somewhere. So maybe that's a place to start.
Shelter leadership feels that offsite adoption events are not very productive, but so much of the community doesn't even know that the shelter exists. Isn't that the truth? It's not located centrally. They usually aren't. How to show that even for PR value, that offsite events are worthwhile? There's so many other ways to count, right?
Oh, that's so true. I know, right?
Yeah.
Because we do get focused on outcomes. And I started out in offsite adoption events many years ago, and I know how hard that it's a heavy lift. And a lot of times it's
It
like
is.
we would get one or two animals adopted. But I think the value of where you're going, and this was something initially our program was only going to really affluent areas. And it's like, why? That just doesn't, first of all, it feels like prejudice. And second of all, we want to be known in the community. So I think advocating for at least doing them occasionally for that very reason. We want our community to get to know us.
It's tempting to say, add it to the adoption application. How did you hear about us? I know we're trying to get those shorter, but there are so many aftershocks, if you will, to an impression. It may not have been in that moment. Yeah. Rescues, in my honest opinion, tend to have strict adoption policies because many dogs have been abandoned, abused, and neglected. And the rescue does not want the animal to suffer this again. It's so true. We experience a lot of trauma. If home inspections, interview, vet reference, etc., is not the way, what approach do you suggest?
Wow. Yes. I think we have to acknowledge those realities. And I think that's why, Mandy, when you ask one thing to like stop doing, I think what we have to recognize is that we don't have as much control as we wish we did, right? And that when an animal is no longer in our care, we don't really have control over what happens. And the reality is that people have pets and they're going to continue to get them. So even if, and we did this a lot with different programs at the ASPCA, just trying to keep a pet in a home, and I think part of that is also the adoption piece. Folks are going to get pets. And if we're a resource and they know that they can trust us and reach out, isn't that going to make a difference? So just trusting that and trying it and just knowing we actually don't have that much control.
And if you're concerned, don't we want that relationship, right? Very important to be able to walk your talk when it comes to communicating in languages other than English. Our shelter did a series of promotions in Spanish on Facebook and failed to have Spanish-speaking staff or volunteers present. Classic, right? We all do this. Present during open hours to accommodate the people we tried to attract. So true.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's so true because you have to have the other side too. It's like, yes, great, we're translating things.
Yeah.
But do we have folks who are able to speak and communicate? I think that's really important. And also thinking about what other options there might be. I know when I worked at LA County, there was, you could call and there were interpretation services available. So if you can't have folks who actually speak the language, what other tools can you use?
Oh, perfect. That answered the next question. So we'll skip that and go to, how do we address long entrenched leadership that has a clear bias against BIPOC in their community that urges transfer outs versus local adoption?
Wow. I mean, that's real, right? And that's, I think first and foremost, it's like naming the thing, like entrenched, and that there's bias there and in systems, right? Ooh, I mean, I think slowly chipping away at it. I mentioned the Care Ready course. Maybe you want to take that or suggest it to your leadership to take it. But I think sometimes being a broken record, like really, and then showing folks the data that animals are staying longer in shelters and we need more homes, and that it's not a solution to transfer out. It just isn't.
I hate that we only have 2 minutes left because these are some of the best questions I've seen pouring in. People are being very thoughtful. And it stinks we're running out of time, and I don't mean to eat any more of it up. What are your thoughts on adopting to known unhoused populations?
Oh, great question. I'm all for it. You know, I live in LA County and we have there's a lot of people experiencing homelessness, and a lot of folks who care deeply about their animals. And generally, they're going to spend 24 hours a day with their pets.
Mhm.
And I think we have to think about once again, being a resource. We moved a lot of barriers in LA County where somebody could get a dog license by using a PO box, or they could use an organization that they were working with. We got creative, and you can too.
Also, in 2019, there was a separate grant for $5 million for shelters to help people assisting unhomed persons with their pet care. So just throwing that out there. If you want to know more, give us an email. Okay, we are running short. We're going to do one more. I'm going to make it a meaty one. How do you navigate community advocates pushing for things that are contrary to your organizational goals? For example, community groups that are against free roaming cats and want the shelter to take them all in or pick them all up. Realizing that the voices that get amplified in the system as it currently stands now, and the loudest folks, example, those who may be able to get access to your board or leadership to implement change, are usually coming from the places of privilege. Such good questions.
Wow, that's deep and it's real. It's real.
Yep.
I think first and foremost, knowing you're not alone. I think building a community of support is crucial. Working together and just being consistent, being really consistent. And I think knowing that you have support of other allies will help get you there. But I think I feel that on a deep level and would be happy to connect more, and we can connect more in the pet forum around that.
That was going to be my next question. So for the rest of these wonderful questions, can we pick this up in Maddie's Pet Forum? We'll post the questions there with some answers. Okay, wonderful. And speaking of the forum, actually Maddie's University, this recording will be available tomorrow, but later today, you'll find a spot mod from the Maddie's Million Pet Challenge under the Learniverse on Maddie's Pet University for this webinar turned into a course. So it's broken apart with additional resources. So you can dive even deeper with your team if you want to use this, say, to start a conversation or training for your staff. It'll be there. So Allison, do you have any final words you want to share before we get kicked off this platform?
Thank you so much to everyone for joining. Your questions were amazing and you are not alone. We can do this.
We can do this. Thank you, Maddie's Fun, for hosting as usual and making space for us to have these important conversations. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Hope it's a 3-day weekend for you, or at least that you get a little rest and relaxation in there and take care of yourself.